Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Indaba Conversation with Chris. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. I want to give a warm welcome to my guest this morning from the South African Chamber of Commerce, USA, located right here in the United States, none other than Neil Diamond. Mr. Neil Diamond, good morning to you, sir. How are you today?
Good morning, Chris, and good morning to all your listeners.
Well, your name has popped up quite a bit recently as a consequence of your role there with the Chamber of Commerce. Before we get to that, I think it's probably fair. People oftentimes hear what a Chamber of Commerce is, but not everybody knows what they do, focused on business interests. Can you tell us a little bit about what the South African Chamber of Commerce in the USA, what it's all about, and what your function is before we get into other questions about all these inquiries that have been coming your way?
Thank you for that great question. Yeah, so the South African Chamber of Commerce in the US represents South African businesses operating in the United States, but also business that has got any interest with South Africa and the binational trade between South Africa and the United States. Our core mandate is to promote trade, investment, and tourism between the two countries, and ensuring that there's a good flow of capital. It's a great source for South Africa to address their transformative agenda, specifically job creation and economic growth.
Well, you mentioned some of those roles, and I think it's interesting to note because the U.S. traditionally for decades was South Africa's largest trading partner, all the way up until about 2014 when China surpassed us. But we still remain the second largest individual bilateral trading partner with South Africa. And that two-way trade runs between 16 to 24 billion. It fluctuates. I just say an average of 20 billion per year, including the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. So you've got a number of companies in South Africa that, I don't want to say take advantage, but they make use of things like AGOA and access to the U.S. market. So a lot of those companies, of course, people pretty easy to figure out. The wine industry, automobile parts, macadamia nuts. I've covered that industry. A lot of people don't know that's a huge success story for South Africa. Now the world's largest exporter of macadamia nuts. Used to be the U.S., then it was Australia, now it's South African. Most people don't seem to know that, but very big success story. And that's an industry that's real different because a lot of aspiring and newer farmers have come into it, so it's really changed a lot. But what are some of the industries that have a big impact? Have I hit that on the head, or are there some others we've missed here that do business in the U.S. As a consequence of their relationship?
I think you've covered the main large industries, but we are forgetting that there's also, in numbers, a large component of smaller businesses that make use of AGOA. Smaller manufacturers, especially in the agro-processed goods space, but also folks that manufacture everyday items. Like in the aviation industry, there's a company in Cape Town that actually manufactures the little screws that keep the fuselage of Boeings together. So we've got a large cross-cut of manufacturers that do make use of AGOA and that participate in the binational trade. Unfortunately, our focus is always on the large auto parts manufacturers and automobile manufacturers, mainly because they add so much monetary value to the binational trade and also are one of the core employers and job creators out of AGOA. But we've got a very large footprint of South African businesses exporting under AGOA, but also exporting under the normal bilateral trade agreement.
Well, in fact, most of the trade between the U.S. and South Africa actually falls under the normal trade. It's not under AGOA. That's about 3 billion of that 20 billion. And the 20 billion, I'm talking, it's two-way trade. So probably about a third, I would estimate current trade from South Africa actually use AGOA. So a lot of it doesn't. I think people should understand too, the South African Chamber of Commerce in the USA is a private organization, correct? It's not a government organization. You guys are,
no.
It is a government organization or no?
No, it's not a government organization. It's a non-governmental organization. It's a membership-based organization, and it's funded by our members and members' interests.
So those members, of course, being business and those interested in business that would like to do business, I imagine. But you touched on something a few moments ago, and I think that this is often lost on people. Germans would understand this because the lifeblood of the Germans' economy and, of course, the Wirtschaftswunder and German economic development since those days, and even prior to that, was always the Mittelstand, the small, medium-sized businesses, which you just a moment ago touched on, like that company. And I'm glad that somebody's making screws for those Boeings because they need a good producer of those screws. We don't want any doors flying off of aircraft. That's pretty crazy. But so the small sizes, and that's also the thing here in the States. Most of the jobs in this country are actually created by small, medium-sized enterprises. The big names get the attention, but it's the small, that's the lifeblood of the economy. It really is where the entrepreneurs come up, new businesses, create new jobs, and expand things. And that's obviously a sector that's important. Is that an important sector for South Africa? Is it growing? Is it stagnating? Or more small businesses entering the U.S. market from South Africa? What's that look like?
The small business sector globally is the largest creator of employment. There is no other sector that can create the vast employment of small business. And in South Africa, small business is really a cornerstone in the economy. I would say at least 60% of employment within South Africa, very similar to the figure in the United States, is created by small business. And in actual fact, there's a small business department in government that supports and stimulates the growth and development of new small businesses. It also has the potential for South Africans to employ themselves and others and feed their families in an environment where unemployment is at an all-time high.
Well, in fact, that is, I think, a major significant issue in South Africa is the rate of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. It's pretty frightening how high it is for youth in South Africa. And it's easy to get a little disillusioned about life if it's hard to find jobs. I mean, as you say, that small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly small enterprises, fill a gap there. They're critically important. And I'm glad you said it's a global thing. I always focus on places, that some people might be familiar with, but it is a global phenomenon. That's where the jobs are created. I mean, historically, that's kind of the case. So which businesses have recently become, I don't want to say more important, but become more noticeable with their exports to the United States? I mean, which you mentioned this manufacturer of screws for planes, and thank you for that, guys, putting those screws in there. But are there any other organizations? I mentioned macadamia nuts a short while ago. That's become a huge industry, so to speak, for South Africa. Anything else that's might come to people's attention that maybe they don't recognize? Oh, wait a second, we're sending that to the States. That's a big market for us.
Well, interestingly enough, our nautical businesses, companies that manufacture boats, US is a big export market for our nautical industry. The US is also a very big industry for our agro-processed goods. We see more and more South African consumer goods finding their way into the US market and onto US shelves. Then textiles and leather goods. There's a very large trade show annually that SAFLEC, the South African Footwear and Leather Export Council, have started attending. And we've seen great traction in the US retail market for South African goods. And we are not just speaking about general goods, it's on all aspects of those goods. High-end leather goods made from buffalo skin and ostrich, right down to something like veldskoen, which is a very popular traditional South African footwear.
I've got four pair of fellies sitting right over here.
Well,
they're all freedom of movement.
Then, Chris, you know that how comfortable they are and how great they are, and it's proudly South African. So we've got all those products finding their way. As the chamber, we also create market activation opportunities. We've got a great project annually, which is in the NASCAR event, where we've partnered with Brand South Africa. We've got a NASCAR Team South Africa car that participates in NASCAR. And this past year, we've had companies like Superforce, Veldskoen, Switch Energy, all that have participated utilizing that platform as a market activation, accessing a new market that historically we have not necessarily focused on. It's been very good for us and for our members to bring South Africa to the fore and bring South African products to the fore. Every item that's exported, whether it's wine, agro-processed goods, or even a set of fallies, supports an industry back in South Africa. Every dollar spent on a South African product in the United States supports economic growth, job creation. There's a picker, a packer, a farm worker, a factory worker that benefits directly out of the employment they enjoy out of South African goods being sold in the US market. It supports a child going to school. It supports a family being fed. So we underestimate the vastness of the bilateral trade and binational trade between the US and South Africa and the impact that has on the South African economy.
Well, that's an excellent segue. You've stolen my thunder. That's where I was coming next. In fact, a lot of people, when they look, this industry employs 500 people, and 400 of those directly attributable to trade with a country. But it's beyond that. Those people, it's a microeconomy. They do banking, they buy food, they support families, they do transport, and everything where they spread their wages to come back in, and the company buys items to make the manufactured goods. It's a much bigger situation. It's difficult to estimate how large that can be. It can be a much bigger segment of society that's tied to these exports. And I think that's an important point to come out with there. Now, I do have a question. If you could do this for me, let me know the anticipated date when Energy Aid will be here, so I don't have to drink Gatorade anymore. I'm looking forward to that. And also, if you could contact Lay's and tell them to throw the cock American barbecue flavor out and bring the flavor that they spice the South African barbecue crisp and bring them over here. We won't call them crisp. We'll keep calling them chips, but the South African barbecue flavor from Lay's is so much better than my own. So if you have any influence with those companies, I realize one's an American, the other's a South African company, but maybe you can weigh in there because, it's the products coming out of South Africa, they're unique. They have their own sort of approach, even when it's the same brand name. Like I say, Lay's tastes differently in South Africa than it does here. And personally, I like the ones in South Africa better.
Well, that happens to be my children's favorite. And every time I take a trip to South Africa, I bring a whole carry-on bag with me filled with South African chips, especially the flavor smoked beef, which happens to be their favorite. But you make a very specific point, and that is South African goods and products are so much more than just consumer items. They are actually, in their individual rights, sharing South African culture, South African society, South African flavor with the world, and in this specific case, with the United States. We underestimate to what extent South Africa has actually influenced the US social fiber. And everywhere that I go, nobody is unaware of where South Africa is. Nobody is unaware of what South African goods are, or have South African friends that gave them a packet of South African Lays. So there's so much happening, not just on a hard economic space, but if we look at cultural diplomacy, and that is where the things come in about how do we share our culture with folks in the US. That is one of the best ambassadors that we have, is South African goods flowing into the United States.
Excuse me. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there for just a second. And I agree with you 100% on that. That's definitely something, and we're grateful for. I mean, it's South Africa's loss, but we are grateful for some of the folks who've migrated here in the past years and now play for our national side, like Ruben de Haas and a couple others. We're grateful for that for our rugby side. It's definitely improved our quality. I see Ruben is playing for the Cheetahs now as well. But let me see this question. Oh, I'm not going to answer that question over here. That's related to something else. So let's shift a little bit here because I'm sure the reason people like Neil Diamond, I've heard that name. And no, we're not talking about Sweet Caroline. It's not hands reaching out, touching me, touching you. I'm sure you get that your whole life. And I'm not going to hurt people with my caterwauling because it's pretty bad. I'm definitely not the guy you want to show up on karaoke night because you'll frighten all the livestock. Anyway, let me get back to this. So your name came up quite a bit recently in the South African Chamber of Commerce here in the U.S. Came up because when President Trump issued his executive order on the 7th of February, in which he opened up a window for a yet-to-be-defined group, he says Afrikaners, but, I mean, people call that many different things, who and Afrikaners, but people who are being racially discriminated against. The executive order talked about stopping financial aid and opening up that program. You guys were inundated, according to news reports, with inquiries from people wanting to know. I'm not sure why they went to you all, but they did. And people, that was the one source. And we heard 10,000, then 17,000 people expressed inquiries. I don't know how many people expressed inquiries, but I can tell you that I've gotten very little sleep since then. I've been streaming and broadcasting in almost incessantly, plus making videos trying to calm people down, to tell them what we don't know, what we do know about it. And, if you want to stay in South Africa, that's fantastic. We wouldn't want everybody to leave South Africa and feel compelled. And if you feel you want to come here, that's your business. But how has that unfolded, and what's the current figure? Is it 17,001 now, or is it 18,000, or is it 4 million? Obviously not. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that really, for many people, put the South African Chamber of Commerce in the U.S. I don't want to say on the map, but for those who are not involved in business, they're like, oh, and suddenly everybody's going to you guys. Can you tell us just a little bit about how that's unfolded in the past week? Because I'm sure that your servers are melting down, your telephone lines are probably just glued together at this stage.
Well, Chris, that's actually a great question. So the news broke on February 7th, at about 5 p.m. US time, EST, and we happened to get the report through one of our contacts, and a decision was taken to say we need to issue an immediate press release on this, indicating that the US South Africa diplomatic relationship is now reaching an all-time low. We needed to address the issues of possible mass immigration of a certain demographic within our country and what that would mean for the economy of our country. Now, let's be clear. It doesn't matter which demographic you pick. Any demographic that leaves South Africa would result in economic hardship. Because everybody in South Africa needs to pull together to make that country work and make it the success it is supposed to be. So if you take any specific group out of the equation, and in this regard, President Trump singled out the Afrikaners, which we know historically have been the farmers in our society. They have been the ones that provide food to our tables, and that has would have had a significant impact on the agro industry as well as food security within South Africa. So the chamber came out strong in terms of our concern, expressing our concern, how this would impact the economy of South Africa. And our focus was purely a business approach. The press statement did have my email address as well as my contact number for any inquiries. And as a result, by the time I woke up on Saturday morning, I had 7,500 emails in my inbox, about 2,000 WhatsApp messages, text messages, and Facebook Messenger messages, to the extent that our mail server just couldn't deal with the volume. I need to be very clear. We are a business organization. We are not a general organization or a community-based organization. But people kind of just flock to us with an overwhelming speed to say, give us more information. And we were quite shocked. So our mail service crashed. Our media team and IT team came up and said, listen, we need to redirect these folks to a platform where they could actually get off our mail server and get off your inbox. And we established that platform on our website where people could register for information. Information only. We don't provide immigration advice or refugee support, just so that we could provide information and get folks out of our mailbox. It went live at about midday on Sunday. By Monday morning, we were at 5,000. By Tuesday midday, we were on about 17,000. I've been requested not to share any more of this data, mainly because we don't want to add to the current debate and racial division that has been caused through this in South Africa. But I can share with you that we have seen a steady growth of the database that we've put together. We have started communicating with people, sharing information with them. We've solicited the support of 2 of our members that are legal experts and that are immigration lawyers that have provided inputs of what a possible refugee program could look like, what refugee status would mean, how this would impact people relocating to the USA. So we just try and share as much information as possible. But the figures that you have mentioned at the times that I've been engaged by the media and our other board members have been engaged by the media were accurate and correct. It started out with 5,000, 10,000, 17,000. And I think we more or less cut that at about 20,000, where we said, look, we cannot provide further information on that. But at the time that we shared our last figures, and that this is in the public domain, we had about 20,000 people, roughly by about middle of last week. We asked people to inform us of how many dependents that would include. And in terms of warm bodies, we're looking at an amount of between 60 and 70,000 that those 20,000 people represent, expressing interest. So we were a little bit shocked when other organizations representing Afrikaners came out and said, but they had almost no inquiries on this matter, which either they have got a disconnect with their membership, or people didn't know what their number was. Because on Saturday, there was a peaceful protest to the US embassy in Pretoria supporting President Trump, where 3,000 Afrikaners rocked up and a memorandum was handed over with 135,000 signatures. Now, in any country, big or small, when you've got such a large group of your population expressing interest to leave, and even leave as refugees, you have to sit up straight and take notice of that. It cannot be ignored.
Well, in fact, that's I don't want to get into politics here. You're a business related organization, but I think you've opened that door a little bit. That we should make that point. One of the reasons why I cover these events is that it's newsworthy. A community of 63 million people and 138,000 people signed a petition that was virtually unknown It wasn't really spread. It was put on WhatsApp and Facebook and things like that. And then 3,000 people show up on a Saturday when the embassy's closed, just express their interest. Clearly, there's interest in this. Whether some, any, none of those people ever actually come over to the U.S. in whatever status, either as an immigrant or an migrant farmer visa program or as a refugee. That isn't the issue here. The issue here is it's a newsworthy thing, and it's why I've been so frustrated, because my government has not put additional information out. The current administration seems to have a playbook because the president had 4 years to prepare for coming back into office, and day one, executive order, action, press statement, boom, day two, day three, day four. But when it came to this announcement on February 7th, we're still waiting for this. The president has directed the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security to define this program and get it in place, and a lot of pent-up interest. I can tell you anecdotally from here that my viewership since this topic has come up and my coverage of it is more than 10 times what it is normally, if not higher, as a consequence. And the interest is insane. I have been burning the candle on both ends and in the middle. Last night, I'm doing 11 o'clock at night because it's 6 a.m. in South Africa broadcast, just to try to allay fears and explain things and direct people to the correct sources, which would be the whitehouse.gov and the the American Embassy in Pretoria. And it's just insane. I'm answering hundreds of questions, or thousands, and I've had at least 40, 50,000 no embellishment inquiries of my own and unsolicited emails. I haven't given out my email address like you have, to, because you're in business for this. And people have gotten my personal email address, which I already get 1,500 emails a day for my business related stuff. So you can imagine what that's like now. Look, I'm just one person out there. I'm a lone reed. I'm not a Chamber of Commerce. I'm not AfriForum or Solidarity or Agra-SA or SAAI or any of these organizations. And that's how many people are coming to me. So for the media not to cover this accurately is a bit disturbing and I think frustrating. People should probably take notice of how many people are curious about this and go, wait a second, why are so many people curious in that? Maybe we need to take a look around here. But yeah, that's a lot of interest, it sounds like, and I understand why that you've been asked to keep the numbers close hold for now. I mean, that after all is your business. But the press have really gone quiet, or they've all said that nobody wants to leave, nobody's interested, and I think that's just denial, and I think that's not good journalism. You got to be objective here. I myself am not encouraging anyone to leave South Africa. I'm also not discouraging anyone who's interested in this program. I'm just telling people about it. We're all biased, but we should be objective, and that's where I'm at. It sounds like the South African Chamber of Commerce USA is trying to be objective about this too, and share what it can and know what you know about it. But you as you point out, you're not an organization that's involved in this. You wouldn't help people who are involved in this, and neither would I. This is up to the U.S. government to handle this. Does that sound fair?
I think that is fair. I can share with you what we have done. I got a letter off to the acting ambassador, or the deputy chief of mission. The diplomatic term is chargé d'affaires, Dana Brown, in Pretoria on Monday last week, requesting her to provide us with further information so that we could share that with the people that have inquired with us. The Chamber can and will never act as an agency of government. We've got a business mandate, not a governmental mandate. As a result, on Wednesday, we wrote to Ms. Brown again and requested that we have at least a contact point where people can direct their inquiries, because the volumes were just growing exponentially. We engaged the State Department at the same time. I was actually in Washington, D.C., Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday last week. And by Wednesday afternoon, the U.S. Embassy in South Africa opened a contact point, which is Pretoria, prminfo@state.gov, where people could have sent their emails through to, and where they could make those inquiries. I'm not aware of anybody that has actually had a response on their emails that they have sent through. So in the absence of that, they fall back to us and request us if we've got any updates. I think the reality of the matter is the executive order was basically the first step in a process that still has to be defined, both in terms of what is the criteria for refugee status, how is it going to be adjudicated, how is it going to be administered, how are people going to be resettled to the United States, those that want to be resettled. But I need to be very clear that the Chamber doesn't encourage mass immigration of any kind, not out of South Africa or any other country for that matter as such. We acknowledge that South Africans have got a fair amount of skills and they are in high demand within the US. We've had inquiries over the last week of employers that have already reached out to us to say, when are these guys coming? How can we provide them with jobs? Out of the agricultural sector, we know that in 2024, up until September, when the year closed, the fiscal year closed, there were over 15,000 H2A temporary agricultural workers that came to the US between February and September. So the South Africans are in demand in the US. But as a chamber, we do not encourage people to resettle or to move. We actually take the approach that we urge both governments to engage in diplomatic discussions to address the underlying causes of this executive order and to explore solutions that do not compromise the economic stability and bilateral cooperation between the United States and South Africa. The chamber remains committed to fostering constructive dialogue that economic trade and relations remain resilient under these current tensions. So that is our official approach. I can also say I've been very vocal historically, and in the last week, but also historically, that the chamber relies on fact, not fiction. And I think that has been kind of a big discussion point. Where does President Trump's information come from? We know where it doesn't come from. We know it doesn't come from the South African embassy in Washington, D.C., but we don't know what is the origin of the information in terms of which President Trump takes decisions. We have forwarded as much information as we could on the subject matter through to the White House, to senators and congressmen that we have relationships with. But we kind of feel that the narrative that is being pushed to the White House is maybe based on subjective views and opinions rather than fact. And that is the kind of narrative that we hope to correct. We do not have a problem in any leader of any country taking decisions, but we would at least like to see that those decisions add and contribute to the overall relationships with any other country.
Well, that raises another question. So I'm a U.S. business and I want to do business in South Africa. I want to export things there. Do you play a role in that in helping direct U.S. businesses to contacts in South Africa, or is it just the other direction?
It's binational, so it is both ways. We are a group of South African business people in the United States that also do business in South Africa. And it's not just the large US corporates that do business in South Africa. There's about 660 listed US corporates on the New York Stock Exchange that do business out in South Africa. But there's thousands more of small and medium-sized businesses that do business out in South Africa. So we try and encourage binational trade. I'm going to share it in a very simple term with you. If you've got a flight from DC to Atlanta and it's filled up with goods and people, you also want to see that the return flight from Atlanta back to DC has got goods and people on it. So that's the whole principle of binational, and that's why we support both-way trade as far as it relates to South Africa.
Now, what's interesting here in South Africa is a lot of parliamentarians and folks, especially the media and social media, have been going on and on about how President Trump is punishing South Africa and taking punitive action. But there is no punitive action in this order. The United States is $2 trillion in deficit last year at the federal level, spent $2 trillion more than we had. And the president saying, for whatever reason, he's reached this conclusion that we're not going to provide financial aid to South Africa in the future, which would cost South Africa an average of $500 million a year. But we have to be clear about that. That's not money that goes to the South African government. Virtually all that money goes to third parties, non-government organizations, contractors, and businesses. Well, that would be a loss here. But it's not punitive. People may view it that way, but that's not South Africa's money. That's the American taxpayers' money, and we do that all over the world. So the piece here that this thing is, if this continues to build, and I don't know that it's going to, I'm not making that prediction. Certainly the relations are not, they're not kissing cousins at the moment, the U.S. and South African diplomatic actors. But what's happening right now is that if this does get ugly, there are actions that can take place. The president can take punitive measures. And the first one that would be very harmful to South African exporters would be the suspension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And I've made it clear from my perspective, the federal law that we have says you must respect private property rights. And since 2018, I've been making the argument that South Africa has made itself ineligible. That's a point. That's my interpretation of AGOA, having worked with a lot. But neither here nor there. The bottom line is that if, in fact, South Africa loses AGOA status, that would be very harmful to South African producers because they'll lose duty-free access for several thousand goods and services. Are South African companies expressing any concern about the possibility? Because this is not a new topic. It predates President Trump. In February last year, a bipartisan group in the House of Representatives put a bill forward to try to reassess the relationship with South Africa. And key on that list was suspending South Africa from AGOA. Are businesses in South Africa trying to reach out to you to find out about this and talking about the impact? I would imagine it's probably a topic of great interest to business in South Africa.
We are extremely concerned about AGOA and the continuation of South Africa in AGOA. I think AGOA has played a major catalytical role in assisting South Africa in achieving economic growth during very difficult global economic period. It has also contributed exponentially to job creation in South Africa, or at least navigating the loss of jobs possibly in South Africa. One thing that we need to be very clear on, and we would ask our parliamentarians, our political leaders, maybe just to take a little bit larger view than purely just South Africa. The reality is that South Africa is on a long list of countries in terms of which President Trump is taking certain actions. I mean, if we look specifically at the fair trade and reciprocal plan that President Trump has recently signed, we are clear that the US have not enjoyed fair trade practices with their trading partners for decades. The US have been providing support and aid. AGOA was an attempt to replace aid with trade. But the US has got its own domestic issues, like South Africa's got its own domestic issues. And we fully respect the fact that President Trump is trying to have a reset to ensure that the US can address its domestic issues in opposed to addressing global issues for which they may not be responsible. But if we look at South Africa enjoys about $440 million annually on support, mainly PEPFAR support. And the US Embassy have come out to say, but that PEPFAR support is not going to be adversely affected. It's about 17% of the overall South African budget on HIV and AIDS support and mitigation. So that will still be there. Our concern at this stage is, will AGOA still be there? And if AGOA is there, will South Africa be included? Because that has got the potential to have significant impact on us. But the main beneficiaries of AGOA are the large US automakers. NAMASA, the South African National Motor Manufacturers Association, estimates that as much as 80,000 jobs could be at risk if South Africa is not included in AGOA. Our own Reserve Bank pegs our economic growth for this year at 1.8%. If we lose AGOA, we're not even going to see a growth in South Africa, and we may even be in a recession as South Africa. I'm not even then addressing the issue of job losses associated with AGOA. So we need to look at this very, very cautiously. But it's not just focused on South Africa. It's part of a broader Trump administration plan to reset the US trade relationships globally. And I think in that regard, as the Chamber, we lobbied aggressively in 2023 for the continuation of South Africa in AGOA, based on the economic benefit of ordinary South African citizens, not just of business and government. And we were successful with a number of other government and non-governmental organizations in that representation to Congress. But we are concerned whether we are actually going to see AGOA continue. And if it does continue, we are even more concerned whether South Africa will continue benefiting from AGOA. If we somehow miraculously end up staying in AGOA, we've kind of heard in the corridors of power on the Hill that there may be other actions on the horizon for South Africa. And that concerns us. All of this is targeting business and trade. And that has an impact on our organization and our members.
Well, understandably so. If you want to affect change, one way to get it quicker is to affect business, because that's where the pressure points are. You hit people in their wallets, and that's where they're doing it. I need to just take a break for a second here and address something in the chat. Sorry, Neil. Someone in the chat a few moments ago said, just going to plane, fly, land, and fill out the USCIS form. Do not do that. I will tell you, do not do that. And I'm explaining you why. Because you cannot apply for refugee status in the United States. That violates our immigration law. That is not going to get you refugee status. If you come here and try to claim that, It isn't going to work. And the days of the previous administration violating our immigration law and allowing people to apply for asylum status who slip in the country illegitimately, those days are over as well. So you have to understand this whole refugee resettlement program is actually frozen by President Trump on the 20th of January because of widespread abuse by this, including bringing hundreds of thousands of Afghans unvetted in this country in the back of C-17s a couple of years ago. And so President Trump suspended that program, which is his prerogative as chief executive of the United States, for review. Now, that program will open up at some point. We're waiting to hear, and this is the South African aspect of it. So a lot of people are spreading a lot of rumors about the refugee resettlement program, 150,000 per year, only this, that. You don't know. You don't know. We don't know until the State Department and the Homeland Security establish the guidelines, and the law is very flexible in what we can do. We can surge to take more, we can take less. In some years, we've taken 30,000 refugees from Somalia and from Myanmar and from Venezuela and Haiti. And in some years, we've taken over 220,000. So let's not get excited about that. And please stop giving false information in the chat, because we don't deal with that here. You're not an immigration expert, the person telling someone to fly here and fill out the form. And by the same token, like the lady from Ireland who contacted me, told me she's selling her stuff in South Africa, she's coming as a refugee. You're not coming here. U.S. law precludes people coming from a place they're resettled in. If you live in Ireland or New Zealand or Canada or Russia and you want to become a refugee to the United States based on this program, it ain't going to happen, because the law says you must be in the United States. So yes, those punitive actions could be very concerning if that in fact does come. And this AGOA program, I should tell the audience, and I'll give you a chance to weigh back in here, Neil. People have to understand the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act was a soft power tool that the United States Department of State devised and Congress approved with law, that was intended to convince African governments to pursue good governance for the benefit of their citizens. That's the purpose of it. The United States really gets little benefit from it beyond that. We allow people to ship their goods and services that fall into categories for 38 countries currently. That number fluctuates up and down. Some are taken off, some are added. They can ship their goods and services into America duty-free and get preferential status over other suppliers to America, only on the promise that you'll follow good governance. You'll focus on health and education and good governance and democracy and elections. And that has been a huge benefit for many countries, but there's not been a bigger beneficiary or country that's taken advantage of access to that than South Africa. They're the biggest on the continent. Now, dollar terms, Nigeria shipped a lot of oil at one point, but that's not the issue. But South Africa has been the biggest actual from a concept of how it benefits people and workers and society. It's been a big impact. But if AGOA were to go away, and people need to understand this, and you can dispute me on this, Neil, if you disagree, but the impact on Americans would be, I go to the package store and I pay 2.5% more for a bottle of wine down here from South Africa, or I might pay a bit more for German BMW parts rather than ones manufactured in South Africa. There is an impact, but the bigger impact, unfortunately, would be on South Africans. And this is, AGOA is something that legislators have grown weary of, because a lot of legislators, not just Republicans and not just President Trump, have been looking at AGOA for the past few years. You know this. You've talked about you had to lobby for them to continue this program because it's public law. A lot of people are like, well, what are we getting out of this? And I, of course, having worked in diplomacy and in the military and multiple embassies across Africa, and one of my last boss at embassy, in fact, was Reuben Brigady. We were at the U.S. mission to the African Union. So I know how this works up close and personal, and it was for us a soft power tool, so to speak. And I don't think many members of Congress recognize that. And anyway, so I think that would you agree that the biggest impact on the loss of AGOA status would affect South Africans more than anybody else?
Yeah, as you rightfully said, Chris, if we exclude export of energy, Nigeria is by far the largest beneficiary. But if we exclude oil from AGOA, South Africa has definitely been the country that have navigated best in benefiting from AGOA and the principles of AGOA, ensuring that AGOA's beneficiaries are those ordinary South Africans that work in factories, that have got manufacturing jobs, that support export industries. So if AGOA is lost, the single biggest loser would be South Africa. Now, I need to say at the same time, the impact on the U.S. economy would be negligible. The U.S. economy is just of such a great scale and such a resilient economy that if they don't get goods from South Africa, well, as you said, you get your BMW parts from Germany. There are very solid relationships in place and bilaterals with Germany and multilaterals with Europe. But the reality is the impact on South Africa's economy would be devastating. Just in the automotive industry, we could look at a potential 80,000 jobs, according to NAMASA. Our own calculation is roughly about 50,000 jobs, because they would still need an amount of locally manufactured goods for locally produced cars that are exported to, for instance, the East and Southeast Asia. But the impact is going to be severe. It's going to affect many South Africans, and it's going to affect ordinary South Africans, ordinary workers that feed their families and send their kids to school.
And from my perspective, not to get too deep in the political side of this is what's so frustrating for me. While people in Parliament puff up their chests and the media attack America on a daily basis, this is counterproductive. It is not helpful to attack American and South African press about this because, quite frankly, AGOA and trade is a gift. Gwede Mantashe said a few days back, if they won't give us, talking about the foreign aid, if they won't give us the money, then we won't give them the minerals. Excuse me, Gwede, we buy those minerals, and in 2023, that was $430 million. Much of that's platinum, and they seem to think they have America over barrel. But the only major mineral that the United States gets from South Africa that would have an impact would be platinum. But our dependence on platinum has dropped, and we can get it from other sources, even though South Africa is the world's largest producer. But like cobalt, people are like, well, cobalt. Well, the United States imports $32 million a year in cobalt. I could put that in my yard. That would fill my yard, $32 million of cobalt. It's not that much. So, this is the temperature really needs to be toned down by parliamentarians. And now I'm making a statement. That's not an analysis. It really is not helpful to anybody here because ordinary South Africans are the ones that are affected by this. And, if you've read The Art of the Deal, then you know that Donald Trump says when you get hit, you hit back with overwhelming force. And it's not good to mess them about. And the reason I go to that, Neil, is that you hit on something that a lot of people in South Africa don't seem to be catching on to. Donald Trump has not singled out South Africa. In fact, this isn't even an immediate response to expropriation without compensation. That bill was signed on the 20th of December, although it's, for big fanfare at Davos, signed again on the 23rd of January. January. We're in February now. January, 23rd January. The days are running together. And it wasn't until the 7th of February, after seeing what didn't happen, that this executive order came out. And so Trump has talked about tariffs to try to get things that he wants in America's benefit, or at least an even level playing field. I mean, for instance, Europe charges us 10% tariffs on our Cadillacs and our Chryslers and our cars that are shipped to Europe, and they're only paying 2.5% to come into our marketplace. So it's an effort to level a playing field. At least that's objective. And the point I'm making here is South Africa wasn't singled out. Let's see, Colombia, Panama, Canada, Mexico, Denmark, and even Russia and Ukraine are getting the pressure from Donald Trump to affect change that Donald Trump wants to see happen. So I don't think South Africans should take it personally. That's my view on it. They may think that Trump has got it wrong, and that's their prerogative to think that. But I don't think that it helps for parliamentarians to turn the heat up and for South Africans to think, woe is me, we're being singled out. Because you're not being singled out. Donald Trump has got a multi-front offense going on right now. He's playing three-dimensional chess, not checkers.
So you're making a very valid point about what is being said locally in South Africa about these issues. And the reality is many of those speakers and political leaders speak to their audiences. They don't necessarily speak to business or to a global stage. As the South African Chamber of Commerce in the US, we have put our trust in the Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola, as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa, to reach out to President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio and have a discussion in and around the tensions in the current diplomatic relationship. We are not going to find any other solution. Threats are not going to create a solution for us going forward. We need to find a diplomatic solution to get us over this impasse. As business, we want to support both governments because we've got an interest on both sides of the Atlantic for this diplomatic relationship to be restored. It's bad for investor confidence, it's bad for trade, and it's equally bad for tourism. We spoke about many things, but we neglect to say that the US in 2021 took over from Europe as the country that sends the most tourists to South Africa. So we have kind of said, let us support our leaders that need to have this discussion on both sides. There are peripheral comments being made. As much as Gwede Mantashe made a lot of comments, Senator Ted Cruz made a host of comments. Some of the congressmen have made some comments. There's even a a letter signed by 4 congressmen that went to the White House on the 11th, specifically, well, firstly, thanking President Trump for his stance and suggesting even more harsh action against South Africa, including the expulsion out of AGOA. So we are requesting those peripheral voices, maybe to just give some air and space and allow the leaders of the two countries to connect on this. We've taken note of the fact that there has been outreaches from South Africa to engage the Trump administration. I think Secretary of State Rubio is currently traveling the Middle East. He's got a lot on his agenda. I'm sure the president in the White House has got a lot on his agenda. But hopefully they could make time for an engagement with South Africa and try and see how we can get beyond the diplomatic issues. We are clear that there has to be an underlying issue on the executive order that was signed. We can discuss and debate what that underlying issue is, but we are very clear on who's getting hurt in the whole process, and that is business and the ordinary workers in South Africa. And that is something that we would like to see that we could mitigate as much as possible.
Well, one area that really is affected here, no doubt, is from this side, and that's foreign direct investment. We won't get into the whole situation of a lot of issues and challenges for those who want to do business in South Africa. President Ramaphosa was at Davos and said South Africa for business. I'll be honest, my money's not going into South Africa right now. That's unfortunate. I'd be happy to do it, but whole separate issue. But you touched on one issue I was going to come to, and then I've got another one here we need to get to before we do wrap up. And you mentioned tourist arrivals. Yeah, U.S. tourist arrivals in 2023 were 262,000 plus arrivals. A conservative estimate $200 per day when you consider lodging and meals and such, which is way under the mark on many people, and a 10-day visit, which is also under the mark. Most people come for 2 weeks or longer on average. That's at least $524 million in direct revenue that pumped right into South Africa's economy on that side from U.S. tourists alone. That could be devastating if, say, this thing escalates and there's sanctions and Americans aren't allowed to travel there. I don't see that happening, or Americans are discouraged from traveling. But that's in the face of all the things happening in South Africa. Still record numbers coming. Now, I want to go another direction here, and I don't know if you know much about this or you have insight of this or how the South African Chamber of Commerce is or is not involved, but a lot of American firms do remote work. They have thousands of South Africans who work for American companies living in South Africa, performing work remotely online for them. It's a concept that's been around for a long time, and I'm talking about call centers. I'm talking about actual, genuine work. We do call centers all around Africa and India and elsewhere in the Caribbean. But a lot of South Africans' livelihoods depend on their jobs from America. The reason I mention this, Neil, is that if this thing were to escalate and get really nasty and Trump were actually to put punitive actions on South Africa, like sanctions, most likely that would prohibit American businesses from doing business in certain aspects with South Africa. And it could cost a lot of people potentially their jobs. So that's my concern. I don't think anyone in the media has even talked about this. I'm aware of this because I know dozens of South Africans whose sole source of employment is actually working for American companies remotely in South Africa. Is this a topic that the Chamber of Commerce is aware of or have any insight on?
Yes, Chris, thank you very much. That's a great question. And I must say, out of this interview, you have touched on some points which some of the most seasoned journalists have not yet touched on in the last 2 weeks. The reality is a lot of US money flows into South Africa by way of business process outsourcing, and that is not just call centers. It also includes areas like accounting, finance, design, industrial design, engineering drawings. There's a host of industries that outsource programming, that outsource to South Africa. But we are competing with countries like India, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, for that work. And if there were to be punitive actions against South Africa, it would have a detrimental impact on certain economies within our country, more specifically Gauteng, which is the economic heartland of our country, but also the Western Cape. That have in the last couple of years done a great job of positioning themselves as a desired destination for business process outsourcing, building capacity and providing some tax incentives and tax breaks for US companies that set up BPOs within the city of Cape Town and in the Western Cape. So we are looking at a significant impact. The reality, however, is we don't know where President Trump is going on this. And that's why, once again, we continue our call on the South African government to reach out, to send a delegation to meet with the Trump administration. And I think in this regard, we need the head of state. We need President Ramaphosa to come and speak to President Trump. We don't need a lower level delegation to address the Trump administration. I, in actual fact, think that will take the relationship backwards and not forwards, because it would actually undermine South Africa's view of how important the U.S. relationship is.
Well, in fact, that's 100% my view, and I cautioned this when at the State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa said, we're sending our teams around the world to get our message out about what's really happening in expropriation, and then those teams are, the intent is to influence America. That did not go over very well. That was a lead balloon. We really don't, as Americans, need the South African government sending their representatives to Tanzania and to France to convince the Tanzanians and the French to lobby the United States on behalf of South Africa. That's really not a good diplomatic move. And I also cautioned that sending a lower level delegation was not going to be good. And we see Ronnie Lamola now claiming that he's getting no traction here in D.C., that no one's giving the time of day. It's talk to the hand, not the face. And this is apparently people aren't listening. And that's exactly what they did. Now, on this, I want to come back before we wrap up, Neil, and give you a chance to explain what the South African Chamber of Commerce is all about, because there's a lot of people came in this after the fact, and they're confused and conflating what your role is here. So before we wrap up, we're going to come back to that. But, you mentioned someone that I've mentioned on my broadcast. A lot of people running around, and they're talking about Elon Musk, and I keep telling you, you need to disabuse yourself of that notion. You need to get this. This is something that was building in the House of Representatives before Trump even came back in office, when he's facing criminal cases last year and running for office. And there is someone who's very hot on this, and that's the person who's the chairman of the subcommittee for African Affairs in the Senate, and that's Ted Cruz from Texas. Ted Cruz is hot on South Africa, and these people, in my view, are fools and not addressing Senator Cruz's concerns and lobbying him. I mean, if you want to be successful in diplomacy, you got to go where the pressure point is, and the pressure point is not Elon Musk. That's a wasted amount of energy. People think because he's Trump's best bud that they're going to get the answer. Musk is busy rooting out missing dollars in our budget right now. That's his big focus, and he's finding a lot of those dollars. So that's interesting. But Ted Cruz is where the pressure needs to go. Anyway, so I think that you've mentioned a few things there, and I just thought I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that Ted Cruz is one, and Marsha Blackburn is another from Tennessee who is talking about this. And South African politicians either are wholly ignorant of this, or they're being very quiet and maybe they're approaching them. But I'm not seeing any evidence on this side that they're approaching the people that they really need to approach. And you're right. I agree with you that if President Ramaphosa really wants to resolve this, now you didn't say this, those are my words, not yours. It's not the smartest thing to start your State of the Nation address by saying to the President of the United States, we will not be bullied. Okay, thank you. I thought it was your State of the Nation address. Let's focus on your State of the Nation. Threatening America is not helpful. But Ted Cruz is the pressure point, Marsha Blackburn, not sending a low-level delegation to your embassy in Washington and then asking for a meeting with the White House. That's not really how it works. And also, President Ramaphosa was angry because he said America was not following diplomatic channels under the Vienna Convention, specifically that we didn't send a dip note to South Africa telling them we were suspending foreign aid and that we were going to have this refugee program. Well, I think diplomatically should have done that. We also should have met in person before this came out, and I don't know if that happened or not happened. With no ambassador there at the moment, the Charge d'Affaires has her hands full. That may or may not have happened, but I suspect it didn't. But we're under no obligation to do that. That's just a courtesy. Certainly, the President Ramaphosa didn't tell his coalition partners he was signing this bill. He caught them off guard. And President Ramaphosa calling Elon Musk over a diplomatic issue is also beyond the bounds of the Vienna Conventions. He should have gone through our mission in Hatfield and then here in D.C. But would you agree that maybe people should focus more on the people in the States who are really raising issues like Ted Cruz and Marsha Blackburn?
I think there's a big need to rebuild relationships, and that those relationships are with all decision makers. Once again, and you very adequately covered the fact that the relationship is running in all directions. It looks like a bowl of spaghetti at this stage. It should more look like a pack of spaghetti before it's cooked, where you've got direct lines of communication between the South African government and the US government. And as business, we continue to urge both governments to engage in constructive discussions with one another so that we could find a resolve to this matter. But we need to acknowledge that there needs to be discussions with other decision makers. We cannot look past Senator Ted Cruz and a very vocal voice against South Africa, a very powerful senator serving on the Senate Subcommittee for African Affairs, and those relationships need to be established. They're not there at the moment. I can share with you as business in the US, we have reached out to have engagements with Senator Cruz, with other senators, as well as with congressmen, so that we could at least share business perspective and business insights with them. We are not part of government's communication mechanisms, not for the US and not for South Africa. And therefore, our engagements is purely on providing information to the decision makers so that they could take a view based on facts and not fiction.
Well, I think it's a fair statement to make there. I'm going to give you a chance here to come back in a few moments, and I'm going to ask this question. It's one from a U.S. perspective, investing in South Africa, and as you mentioned, you look at it two ways. So that's why you try to help business. One of the things that's came up has been a big attention getter is the requirement for under broad-based Black economic empowerment rules in South Africa that force businesses to share equity. This is a sticking point with Starlink coming to South Africa, and Starlink chose never to apply for a license or ICASA because of the 30% requirement to hand over equity to a South African business based on BEEE. Has this been something that is a bit of interest to American companies wanting to do business in South Africa? Has it come up before? Because I've talked about this endlessly over the past several years since I retired from active service and have done this sort of thing about this. I believe it's an impediment to U.S. businesses going in there. I don't know if it's a major impediment because small businesses it doesn't really affect, but larger businesses it would have an impact. The Starlink issue is one that certainly got a lot of attention. Is that an issue that's come up with U.S. business interests going into South Africa from a foreign direct investment standpoint?
Let's maybe start out by saying, in terms of foreign direct investment, South Africa still offers one of the most attractive investment destinations, both in terms of a banking, but also in terms of a judicial and a legislative framework for business to do business and to be able to repatriate profits back to the United States. The challenge, however, is that South Africa is a fledgling democracy. A lot of the legislation in South Africa is framed in and around government's transformative agenda to address certain historical imbalances. And whether we like it or not, it is South Africa's domestic policy to address 300 years of colonial rule that have left a large part of the South African community in a position of poverty. Now we can unpack whether that is being addressed by broad-based Black economic empowerment. Certainly within the domestic environment, it has facilitated and it has sped up the transformation of business in a broader crosscut of society, not just within Black people, but also within colored and Indian communities in South Africa. The question would be is if a foreign investor wants to place investment in South Africa, whether those BEE requirements is a limitation. Now, I can share that the single biggest inquiry that we receive from US companies wanting to set up shop in South Africa is the impact of BEE. And you allude to the fact that it only affects big business. Well, the reality is it doesn't. It affects all business because any interaction that you have with government, and government remains the single largest procurer of goods and services in that economy, both on a national, provincial, and local level. So any business that a US company would like to do in South Africa, if they do not have BEE, it's going to be very difficult for them to be successful in accessing government supply chain management opportunities. So I think it does require a review. It is a bit of a minefield, so I want to be very cautious in saying, in terms of the domestic policy in South Africa, it does contribute to the transformation agenda, but it has at the same time limited international investors and in some instance made people take the decision not to set up shop in South Africa.
Well, thank you for that answer. What I was, let me be clear where I was coming at, make the distinction. If I'm General Motors and I want to reinvest in South Africa, which they divested from when my government stole the company from shareholders a few years back ago, and we now call it Government Motors, And by the way, full disclosure, I do own shares in Government Motors now after it was relisted on the stock exchange, and it's done well for me. But of course, General Motors famously divested from South Africa and left there a few years back, and they were screaming about that. But General Motors hires lots of employees, and anyone knows over, I think, 50 employees normally or something like that. The rules are different times. They're going to have to comply with those rules. And yes, I 100% with you. I agree with you that if you're going to be involved in the business sector in South Africa, from a foreign direct investment standpoint, you're basically going to be cut out of half the economy if you don't address these situations, regardless of the size of your business, because the government's about half the economy, GDP. But what I was getting at is, if I'm an American, I'm a small businessman here, and I want to, ship fellies here, and I want to invest, a couple $100,000 in the Western Cape and employ some folks in the Cape Flats who have some skills, craftsmen to be cobblers and make shoes and put them together and start a business here. If I keep my business under 50, then it probably wouldn't as big a concern for me as it would be for a big organization, a large company. That's where I was going with that. That's the distinction I was making. I understand where you're coming from. Let me give a chance here, because a lot of people have been coming in here and they seem that do not understand what the role of the South African Chamber of Commerce is. And we'll wrap it up. You've been very generous with the time, but can you tell us once again, what is the role? It's a private organization. What do? You facilitate business, you help businesses make contact, you lobby on behalf of business, and your membership is comprised of business. I think I've hit that, but I'm going to give you the floor so you can explain to people once again, remembering that a lot of people watching this program, currently about 2,100 people watching us right now, have come into this late and have not heard what your description was at the outset.
Thank you very much, Chris. As at the beginning of your program, the South African Chamber of Commerce is a business organization representing South African business interests in the United States. We also represent South Africans in the US doing business with South Africa. Our core mandate is the promotion of trade, investment, and tourism, and to look at the free flow of capital between the two countries in an attempt to achieve objectives like economic growth, inclusion, and job creation in South Africa. We acknowledge that business from the US is a major catalyst in those areas in South Africa. We do lobby for business. We support business setting up shop within the United States from South Africa, especially small and medium-sized exporters. But we also have a number of larger companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange that we support in terms of the broader relationship, binational relationship and bilateral relationship in trade between the two countries. We are not a community organization. We do not do immigration. We do not do immigration support or refugee applications. That is not our business. But we have been in that space, unfortunately, and we are at this stage just providing information to people to ensure that an accurate fact set finds its way through to South Africans wanting more information.
Well, two final questions. All right. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce in South Africa, do you have any, do you deal with those guys at all? Is that a relationship? Because we, of course, have our chambers of commerce located around Africa as well.
Yes, so we've got a good relationship with Michelle Constant, the CEO of AmCham, as well as Sandile, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa, or AmCham, as they are known. They do a very good job in representing U.S. interests in South Africa. And just to be clear, we represent South African interests, business interests in the United States. They represent U.S. business interests in South Africa. So it's important for us to have that relationship with one another. We've got a common objective to see binational trade flourish between the two countries.
Excellent. And the final question I have for you, Neil, is Stormers or Bulls?
Believe it or not, I'm from Mpumalanga, so I'm actually a Puma. Jimmy Stonehouse is my coach out there, so Pumas is my team. I know that they play very well if all those other teams are robbed of their Springboks playing outside of the country, and when the box comes back, the Pumas get a bit of a hiding. But a big shout out to Mbombela, Nelspruit, and all the Puma supporters out there.
Well, okay, you'll get a free pass on that. If it had been the Bulls, we would have abruptly ended this conversation. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a Stormers fan. But I must say that my excitement was palpable a couple years ago. I do live play-by-play and color commentary of rugby. And for the Currie Cup final that was up in Kimberley between the Griquas and the Pumas, that was incredible. Of course, I'm very disappointed. Anybody who plays rugby on concrete disguised as grass, like the Griquas do, deserve our support. And so I was pulling for that. But congratulations, Jimmy Stonehouse, winning that Currie Cup. And congratulations to the Bulls who pilfered Devin Williams to play for them instead of the Pumas anymore. But it is interesting. I didn't expect to hear a Pumas fan, so that's exciting. But thanks for sharing that. Neil Diamond, thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it. I hope that you felt you were treated fairly on this program. And I think we had an interesting discussion about things. A lot of people tuning in expecting one thing and not watching the entire program. We did discuss the U.S. refugee resettlement program extensively during this conversation. It was not the beginning. It wasn't the finish because other issues bear on this. And that's what I want to talk to the head of the South African Chamber of Commerce in USA. Any final thoughts from you, Neil? I'll give you the floor for a couple moments and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Chris. It's important that we get the message out there that South African business is vibrant, it's resilient, but it's important for us to take hands with the US, that the US business community does play a key role in South Africa's economic transformation, and we need to keep US business vested in the country for the success of South Africa's economy, but also for the economic growth and job creation of South Africa.
Well, that wraps it up pretty well, Neil. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. You're very generous this morning. I hope that this clarifies things. I'll leave an open window open if you'd like to chat again sometime down the road when we find out more about what's going on, and maybe just talk about the interaction of businesses, U.S. and South Africa. Because I mean, without business, we don't have paychecks and we don't have jobs and can't feed our families. So it kind of matters in the scheme of things. Kia leboa, bye donkey for your time. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get you back on here sometime.
Nyabonga Kakulu, thank you very much for having me on this morning, Chris.
It's my pleasure. I'll let you drop off and I'll wrap up my stream right here, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, that's Neil Diamond from the South African Chamber of Commerce here in the United States. And let me get him over there. Okay, he's out. All right, well, he's a pro. He knows what he's doing. He got himself out there. Okay, folks, some people thought one thing. Wasn't clickbait. We talked about the refugee resettlement program. That was the intent. We did that. But a lot of people don't understand what the South African Chamber of Commerce is, what they do. I mean, I've heard people say it's a government organ. It's not. It's a private organization, just like our American Chambers of Commerce located in Accra and in Cape Town and elsewhere. Their responsibility. So we just need to frame that. The one disappointing thing from the conversation, the one disappointing thing from the conversation that he wasn't able to share with us, and that's fine, was that we don't know how many inquiries they've received since the early stages of this unfolding. They were asked not to share the information. I can understand why. I'm sure the government probably asked them not to share that. The government doesn't want people to know how many people have been inquiring there. But the government hasn't approached me and said, Chris, please don't tell them how many people are asking you about this program. I can tell you it's tens of thousands. Tens of thousands have addressed me and asked information on this program. So I'm under no such constraint from the government of South Africa, either by request or they haven't reached out to me. But I want to thank my guest once again, Neil. We've had a pretty heavy hitter lineup this week. Yesterday, Vincent Dutoya from the Sightlander Civil Defense Organization was here. Today, Neil Diamond from the South African Chamber of Commerce in the United States. Tomorrow, it's Franz Cronje, former CEO of the Institute for Race Relations. And then Thursday, Rob Hersoff, South Africa's now becoming famous personality and successful businessman, will be on the program. So we have a lot going on here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'll be back with the news in about 50 minutes. And once again, the news will be no chat until I get through the news, because a lot of people want the news. They don't want to hear 18,000 times, will I be able to take my pets to America? I'll be addressing that afterwards if you want to hang around for that. But the news will be on about an hour. Thank you all for being here. Please watch my content. Please share the channel. Help us grow. I do appreciate all the support. And thank you once again to my guests and everybody who was here. There were a few super chats. I apologize for not getting to them. Let me see if I can address them right now very quickly. I'll find them. Let me get over here. Before we get off here, just a moment. So, and I won't be able to ask questions of him if he had a question here, because obviously he's no longer here. But we had several super chats. My goodness, I didn't see this. Applied for asylum in the USA in 2008 for the exact reason Trump is offering refugee status, then was deported. 3 courts did not believe can asylum be pardoned, reversed. Yeah, that's a federal government decision. That sort of thing can be reversed. But Andre Bitke, you should, if you're in the U.S., if you're in South Africa now, you would be able to apply for the refugee. It shouldn't have an impact on that unless you committed a criminal act, and were deported with, basically with prejudice. But it doesn't sound like you were deported with prejudice. So, in fact, that's what they're doing now is they're threatening the people who entered this country illegally. You're going to be barred from the country of ever coming back. I don't believe that's your case, but I don't know the situation. Hillbilly Skeptic says, if the ANC fails to deliver on EWC to the majority, won't that push them to MK and EFF? Well, the problem is that the ANC has opened up a can of worms. This wasn't an issue. This wasn't something people were pressing for, and now it's become a problem. Charmaine says 1,600 people watching. Do a poll. Well, I did a poll when we had 5,000 watching, and we got good results from that last week. The like for Chris. Thank you, Dylan. Pin C77 just because. Neil's opinion on my previous super chat. Sorry, Andre. I didn't get a chance to ask him that. I can ask him offline and see if he'll answer that. Stupid leaders think minerals. Yeah, exactly. The stupid leaders are stupid leaders, and that's the problem. Anyway, folks, that's going to wrap it up from here. 14 of you still here. Be sure to hit the like button. We haven't even hit 1,000 likes. Come on.
That was easy.
It didn't cost you anything to watch this other than your data and your time, and it cost me my time, which is very valuable. I make a lot of money as a consultant when I spend my time doing it. But instead of spending my time doing consulting, I'm here for you. And the only time I'm stepping away right now, I'm not taking consulting gigs that make me a lot of money because this is an important issue and I'm trying to help people. And that's my choice. So anyway, don't cry for me, Argentina. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just letting you know that I forego a lot of revenue by doing this and because it's important. All right, folks, cheers. We'll see you hopefully in about 49 minutes right here on the same program for the news. And remember, I'll have the chat turned off initially, but the chat will be turned on. So if you come on there and you're freaking out, just take a deep breath. It'll come on. But people have been getting a little bit frustrated because I keep getting interrupted with questions about the refugee program. And so I'm going to do the news, and then you can hang around. We can talk afterwards about that stuff. All righty, ladies and gentlemen, once again, appreciation to my guest. We'll catch you here shortly. Cheers. That didn't go well at all. Something is wrong there. That got moved around. Sorry there, folks. There you go.